Hello everyone, I have a short lecture here I want to give on tracing. Now tracing is the act of going through your code line by line and figuring out what has changed in that code. Basically, what has changed in the state of the variables in input and output. Now we're going to use something called long form tracing. This is what the book calls long form trace. We don't use short form trace. So I am going to walk you through an example of tracing a program here, this very short program. Now when we do a long form trace, what we're going to do is we're going to create a grid that is going to have as its columns the lines of code that we're going to be working with, a column for each variable that is declared in the program, and then a line for input and a line for output. So if we look at this program, you can see that we have we have four variables. We have scanner in, but that'll be handled in the input. We have three variables, integers A, B, and C, and then we have system out. So I will create my grid. I'll have a line. I will have three variables, A, B, and C. I will have system input, which is our scanner, and then the system output. So now we're going to take each one of these columns, and then whenever something changes in the program, we are going to note it here. If nothing changes in the line of code that has to do with our variables or input and output, we don't need to write it down in tracing. So for example, if we look up here, the first time anything changes here was going to be line 5. Line 4, the scanner is initialized, but there's nothing in the scanner yet, so we don't need to note that. Line 5 is int a equals 2, so we are initializing the variable a at 2. So we will note that as the first line of our trace. Note line 5, a equals 2. Okay, and so as values change, we are going to note them on here. This helps us keep track of what is in memory of what these variable values are. Now, in the simple program, it's not a big deal, but when you start getting into larger programs where things change a lot, and especially when you start having repeating code like loops and things, this will make things a lot easier to try and figure out where things are going wrong. Okay, so now if I go on with that, the next line of code that actually has something that changes is line 7. Line 7, we print something out to the console. So line 7 is going to be enter some value to be doubled. I won't write it all out, but that's where it would go. After that, we have line 8. Now in line 8, there are two things that happen. So we're going to actually have two things that happen in line 8. We need to put them in order of which they occur. So in this case, line 8 is int b equals in.nextInt. So the first thing that's going to happen, we are going to resolve the right side of that line. Remember, the assignment operator, doesn't matter if it's arithmetic or anything else, the assignment operator, the equals sign, the assignment operator, is always the last thing to be evaluated. So we are going to first evaluate the right side, which is in.nextInt. So we are going to get input from the scanner. So someone's going to type something and hit enter. So what's going to happen is in line 8, like say someone types in 3. They're going to type in 3 and then don't forget the new line character, the enter. We just talked about that in our last lecture. So that is the right side of this command. The next thing that's going to happen is the nextInt method is going to take the 3 and it is going to store it. It's going to send it over to the variable b. What that means is when this occurs, 3 appears and all that is left in the buffer in the scanner is the new line character. Okay? And if this is confusing to you, go back and watch the last lecture on input and wrapper classes where I talk about this and give examples. So after line 8, after it has occurred, we have entered the value 3, hit enter. NextInt takes that, moves the integer into variable b, and that's where we are. So the next line, line 9, int c equals a times b. Well, this is basic math, right? So a times b is 2 times 3, so c is going to be 6. Okay, and then in line 10, we are going to report the value. So the report is b, which at this point is 3. So b doubled is value of c, 6. And that's what gets reported. So this is a very simple example of a long form trace. the key takeaway for long form trace is that for every variable that we have and for every input and output, basically output because input will be a variable itself with a scanner. For every variable and for the output, we are going to have a column. And every time something changes in either the variables or in the output, we are going to note it and note the line that it takes place. When more than one thing occurs, when more than one change occurs on a single line, we have to note it in the order in which it will occur. So like in line 8, we have to note that it will first get the input into the scanner buffer. It is then going to take that input and then store it in variable B. Okay? So this is tracing. It's not a very difficult thing. It's just going to take some work. Really, the key with tracing is to go slow and to be careful. It is very easy to skip a line or forget that something happens or maybe reverse the order in which things occur in a line of code. This is where that order of operations, the operator precedence, really comes into play. Okay, so I have a short quiz for you on Blackboard. Yay, I know you're excited. That is going to ask you to trace another short program. So please take a look at that quiz, get it done before next class starts, and we will see you then.